Do that. There we go. Perfect timing to remember. But I will introduce myself briefly. My name is Tori Hunt. I am the Youth Engagement Coordinator at Earth Echo International, which is a nonprofit dedicated to building a global youth movement to protect and restore our ocean planet. And today I'm so honored and excited to be serving as the moderator for our event. So again, welcome. This event today is held in partnership with Earth Echo International, the Earth Law Center, World Ocean Day, and the Ocean Project. And again, welcome to everyone that is just now joining us. Before we actually get started and jump into today's conversation, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items, and I wanted to first draw our attention to our community agreement so we can take notice to the things that we will be mindful of as we share this space together today. I will also note that this session is being recorded for future educational purposes, so that we will be able to share this recording afterwards. Please keep your microphone muted as we go throughout today's session so we can limit the amount of background noise that we have going on. And then we will welcome questions to be dropped in the Q&A feature of our Zoom meeting, which you can find on the bottom panel, and it should be next to your chat box. You can also feel free to drop stuff into the chat, any questions or thoughts as we hear from our speakers, and we will have a designated time at the end of our session to take any questions. And at this time, I wanted to pause and invite everyone who's with us today to share an introduction in the chat. We would love to learn a little bit about everyone who is joining us. So feel free to share your name, where you are joining from, and then what it is that you are hoping to gain from today's conversation. And then my awesome colleague, Rachel, will be dropping what I just said into the chat, just in case you did not catch everything that I would like for us to share. So I'll give you a moment to type in your intros before we move on. All right, again, thank you all for being here. Looking forward to seeing your introductions in the chat so you can learn a little bit about everyone who has joined us. And then before we dive in to our conversation today and hear from our speakers, I actually wanted to set the scene a little bit, share about our speakers, and give you a little background information to the Global Plastics Treaty and INC4. So this awesome roadmap and timeline was created by my colleague at Earth Echo International, Dr. Sam Athey, and I wanted to draw our attention to March of 2022. And this was when Resolution 514 was adopted and mandated the creation of the International Negotiations Committee, which we refer to as the INC. And you'll keep hearing us say INC throughout today's session, but the International Negotiating Committee was created to lead the designation of the development of a legally binding instrument regarding plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. And this is something that is looking to finish by 2024. And this global treaty is what brings us here together today in April of 2024, because as you all may be aware, the full life cycle of plastic from its creation to its very end threatens the global climate, ocean health, our human rights, and social justice. And all of these issues are not occurring in isolation. They are inherently intersectional and disproportionately affect those most marginalized and are vulnerable across the globe. So today we hope to paint a picture of plastics as an ocean justice issue and provide some perspectives from various experts across our planet and across different fields of how these inequities can lead to tangibly be addressed, and specifically how we can address these things before the fourth negotiation session that will take place in Ottawa, Canada, INC4, which you see down here in this bright blue. And you see here all of our amazing speakers that are here with us today. I would like to now turn it over to our first speaker, Shamyra Lavigne, who is the executive assistant at RISE St. James, Louisiana, and is a third generation human rights activist who will be able to walk us through the perspectives of frontline communities, particularly in Cancer Alley of the United States. And again, thank you all who are dropping your introductions in the chat. So excited to have you here. Thanks, Shamyra.
Thank you. Is it okay if I share my, okay. I got it. Okay. Okay, so can everyone see? All right, can you see this?
Yes, perfect.
All right, great. So good evening, everyone. My name is Shamyra Lavigne Davy. I'm the executive assistant at RISE St. James, and I'm an advisor on the conceptual committee for the Frontline Resource Institute part-time. And I use my pronouns as she and her, and I am here to give you a little background on where I'm from and the organization that I am with. And also I will have a little call to action at the end. So if you are on your laptop, you're gonna need your phone to possibly scan a QR code, but that'll be a little bit towards the end of what I'm speaking. And I just wanna share my experience with you guys, and I'm open to any questions if we have some time for that. And thank you, Tori, and everyone who have invited me to speak today. I'm honored to be here, and I appreciate this chance to speak to everyone. I'm seeing all the locations people are from in the chat. Like, keep them coming. Thank you all for being here. So, the organization that I work with is called RISE St. James, Louisiana. We just changed the name. And RISE is a faith-based grassroots nonprofit organization that's fighting for clean air and water and the eradication and expansion of petrochemical industries in St. James Parish. And you will see that is a picture of some of the members that are from St. James Parish. So what is Cancer Alley? Cancer Alley is an 85-mile stretch of road along the Mississippi River, and it stretches from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. And in that 85-mile stretch of road, there's over 150 petrochemical facilities. And that's how it's been deemed the name Cancer Alley. So in St. James itself, it's called a parish. Most places have counties, but Louisiana, we have parishes. And so St. James Parish is where I was born and raised and where my mom still lives today. So in St. James Parish, you will find the demographics are actually about 49% African American, about 45% Caucasian. However, in the districts that are mostly African American, that's where all the industries are housed. It is very segregated when it comes to industries, and the industries are placed in the African American communities intentionally, because when the Caucasian residents say that they don't want the industries, the local politicians veto them and don't allow them to be built there. But in St. James Parish, which is made up of 7 districts, the 4th and the 5th district is the most heavily populated with the petrochemical facilities. And growing up in St. James, I used to think that these industries were possibly like making something. Like I thought they were some type of factory. And I say that because there were tall metal stacks, and those stacks would be emitting some type of flame. They would be emitting some type of look like smoke that would be coming out of the stacks. And as a little girl growing up a mile or two from these industries in St. James, I never thought that those emissions were toxic. I never thought that those flames are burning off chemicals. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I learned what was actually being emitted from those industries. And some of the chemicals that were being emitted were benzene, formaldehyde, ethylene oxide, butadiene, PM 2.5, PM 10, and the list goes on and on. And the industries typically are making some type of polystyrene, or plastics, or so on and so forth. So the community I was living in was actually on the front line, and the adults had failed us. And I learned that as I got older, because I was that little Black girl that grew up next to these industries that were making rich people richer and was killing my family members and making us all sick. I have an aunt that passed away from cancer. I have another aunt that passed away from cancer. I have an uncle who has cancer. I have another uncle who has cancer. I have a neighbor who's died of cancer. We have friends that have died of cancer. There's people in their 30s that are getting diagnosed with cancer. It is like a present day genocide happening in our community. So, and also, as you see on the screen, the cancer risks are more than 700 times the national average. You're 300 times more likely to get cancer just by living in our community. So, and this lady right here in the red, this is my mom. My mom is actually the one who began Rise St. James. In 2018, she heard about a huge juggernaut of a petrochemical facility that was proposed to be built 2 miles away from my childhood home and my mom's home to this day. And when she heard about it, it was on the news because the governor was announcing it, saying, "Welcome to Formosa Plastics. They're coming in, a $9.4 billion Taiwanese industry that will be built 1 mile away from a school." And the facility would be the largest facility in the nation in the United States. And it housed 14 different industries in that one industry. And the goal was to be creating plastics and ethylene oxide. So my mom, who was a Taurus, heard about that, and true Taurus faction was like, "No, not today." So she was a school teacher at the time in St. James at St. James High School, and when she heard about this, she decided to stand up and fight, and that is how Rise St. James was created. And so, I can't speak about this without letting y'all know about my mom. So then in 2020 is when I came over to help my mom. So to give you a little background on Formosa Plastics, like I said, it's a $9.4 billion industry from Taiwan. They have a history of polluting the community. They have a history of being a bad neighbor. They have a history of breaking the law. They have a history of polluting waterways. And the Louisiana governor decided that, "Come on into Louisiana, you can build here." And that is a representation of how the politicians treat these industries. They roll out the red carpet for them, and they gaslight us into believing that there's nothing coming out of these industries. They gaslight us to tell us that Cancer Alley is a myth. And they gaslight us to tell us that we are getting cancer because we have a poor diet. So when Tori mentioned earlier about the life cycle of these plastics, we're talking about, in our experience, when the plastics are being created and how it impacts our community. Here I've highlighted some of the chemicals and how it impacts the body that Formosa Plastics would be emitting. As you all can see, I'm sure you've heard of some of these. Also, here on the right is some of the history of Formosa and how they've been a horrible neighbor. They were sued in Texas in 2019 and they lost and had to pay $50 million for violating the federal law of the Clean Water Act. They have a history of doing this. And there's some allies that we have in Vietnam that are in jail for standing up against them. So we have saw some victories. In 2022, a judge blocked Formosa Plastics from being built into our community. We celebrated. It was such a victorious moment for us. And then Formosa Plastics, they appealed the decision. So when they appealed the decision in January of this year, we learned that the appellate court decided to overturn our victory from 2022. And so we were devastated. But we also recognize that the judges in that case were more concerned about the job that the industry were going to bring rather than the chemical pollution that they were going to bring.
Shamyra, I'm so sorry to interrupt. due to time, we will have to move on in a moment to another speaker, but I know that you have a call to action that you really want to.
Yes,
So I just wanted to
thank
give you a
you.
time warning. Thank you so much of everything you're sharing so far. There it is.
There it is. Here it is, guys. So I know some people may be on your phone, but if you're not on your phone, if you're on your laptop, please take out your camera right now and scan this QR code. And this QR code will send you to a link to be able to sign our petition. This petition is to urge President Biden to revoke Formosa Plastics permits. And we also had a victory yesterday as well that I can tell you all about, but I know we have a time restraint. But I will give this to y'all for maybe about 10 more seconds. If you can scan this, this will be a huge help for us. And also there was a HON rule that was passed yesterday by the US EPA that we're 24 hours into this new rule that has lowered the emission level allowed by these industries. So I can get Tori, I'll see if we can get this sent out to anybody who
Yeah.
may have trouble with it. But that is actually the end of my presentation. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Shamyra, for coming, sharing your insights. That was so powerful. And I love seeing all the support in the chat. And thank you, Sam. I believe you just dropped that link so people can go to it directly. And yes, we will be following up via email with everyone so that they can access that. Amazing. Next, we're going to throw it over to our next speaker, Joshua Prentice, who is an ecologist and youth activist who is joining us from Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't want to steal too much of your thunder, but Joshua will be attending INC4 with a youth delegation. So we're very excited to have him share his thoughts. And Joshua, I have your presentation, so I will go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, sure.
And
thank you, Tori.
For you, you're welcome. Let me get this to full screen. There we go.
Yeah, so thank you. Hello, everyone. That was an amazing presentation by my colleague speaking before me. I learned a lot. So I'd like to speak about the youth perspective and our demands for INC4. So to begin with, my colleagues and I have been following INC since its inception during UNEP. And a few of my colleagues and I, we formed a coalition of youth constituencies. Some here probably heard of them, Youngo, the UN Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform, the Churn Youth Major Group of UNEP, to form a coalition to coordinate and centralize youth demands for the INC processes. We've been doing this since INC1 in Uruguay, and we continue to do so, and we intend to do so for any future INC meeting. So this is our perspective going into INC. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll say this as a brief on how I came about these youth priorities. So we created them via consultations. So this coalition is called the Global Youth Coalition for Plastic to Combat Plastic Pollution. And as a plastics matter focal point, I've been helping the GYCPP host consultations and also gain inputs for the document, the negotiation text. To create interventions to present in written statements and also orally during negotiations moving forward. So I'll show you these time constraints. I only picked 4 demands that we like to see. I'd like to share them with you. Next slide, please, Tori. So the first one is a full life cycle approach, plastic pollution reduction, a human rights-based approach, and just transition, and the protection of biodiversity and ecosystem health. So I'll expand these more going forward. Next slide, please, Tori. Thank you. So we would like to see a full life cycle approach. The reason for this is because there needs to be monitoring and also changes to the upstream, midstream, and downstream of plastic pollution globally as well. When it comes to the legacy plastics being created through the many industries and businesses globally, there is a lot of waste being created from them, especially and waste that we see on our walks, on the beaches, polluting the environment. There needs to be a full life cycle approach to address this, starting at the beginning and all the way down to the end. Because plastics are from oil and gas, this has indirect impacts to climate change and also human rights as we try to transition to new green and renewable energies. plastics tend to become a huge source and push for, a huge source of demand for oil and gas, which we don't want to see going forward. Next slide, please. Yes, and plastic pollution reduction. So I focused my thesis for my master's on plastic pollution. And locally in Trinidad, speaking from a citizen's perspective, we have a huge issue of transboundary pollution from plastics. If you walk along beaches of many cities, including Trinidad, you see plastics that and other forms of waste that aren't even from our country. They're from Asia, Latin America, and other regions that are not even near our country. And because this has a lot of impacts regarding bringing foreign objects and invasive species, as well as bacteria that we have no idea how they even got to our shores. In addition to this, we need to protect our biodiversity within the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was recently adopted at Jeff and the Biodiversity Summit. And we need to reduce plastic pollution for human health, environment health, and the well-being of the environment. Next slide, please. Yes, and a human rights-based approach and just transition. We cannot make this change without recognizing and addressing the social, economic, and environmental impacts of plastic pollution. And we need to show a just transition. There needs to be access to the right of participation of all stakeholders, the right to access effective remedies for harm caused by plastic pollution to remediate the ecosystems affected by plastics, and also the rights and health of all persons, particularly of children and youth, women, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, local communities, and workers across the plastic value chain, including waste pickers. As you all know, there's something called waste colonialism, where plastics from the global north countries, particularly America and Europe, find this way to poorer countries that have no choice but to import them and put them store them within their countries due to the need for revenue. So they kind of stuck in a rock and a hard place. And these things lead to human rights atrocities, because then the human rights and the health of the citizens of these countries are then placed at a huge risk, because they're breathing smoke and smog from fires in landfills, burning plastics, their injuries from plastic themselves, and just overall a low quality and standard of life that needs to be addressed. And there needs to be a just transition and the respect of human rights moving forward within the INC process. Next slide, please. Yes, and the last point, the protection of biodiversity and ecosystem health. Now, I believe we all here are environmentalists in some regard, so we all need to recognize and understand the value of having a healthy ecosystem for the support of not just humans, but ecosystems and the services they bring. Plastic pollution is a very huge impactor of the health status of ecosystems, mainly oceanic. In fact, most of the plastics within Trinidad and Tobago and SIDS come from land-based sources. I can attest to this myself. My research actually found that there was at any one point in time from a freshwater outflow, there was a 1.8 pounds of garbage, plastic marine litter per minute flowing out from a river, a major river in Trinidad and Tobago. That shows, and this river itself was the Caribbean River. It is a major river located within a mangrove ecosystem, which is a protected area under the Ramsar Convention. And this is just one source and one river. You can imagine globally, in more developed and more population dense countries, the amount of plastics flowing from freshwater sources out into the marine environment. So it's freshwater, brackish, and marine ecosystems, nearshore and offshore ecosystems getting affected by plastics. So we need to protect these ecosystems due to services they provide, such as the shoreline protection, the biodiversity protection. There are a lot of protected species that exist in these places, the storage of carbons, and there are also things that we haven't even fully assessed yet, like if plastics and the chemicals they leach during the degradation time, if it even affects mangrove tree growth or vegetation growth. These are all questions that need to be answered, and there's a precautionary approach in most ecosystem studies, where instead of analyzing it, we need to be precautionary about it and remove these, even if a threat isn't necessarily identified. So these things also fall under the Coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and other MEs. I understand that it is touched upon in the upcoming BBNJ resolution as well, not fully. But these are the main four demands that we like to see as youth moving forward within the INC process. And it has been, a lot of our inputs have been included. So yeah, that's mostly it from my part. I hope I saved my time, Tori. If my has any questions or like to meet with me or my colleagues during INC in Ottawa, feel free to connect with us. I know my colleague Shannon is in the chat right now as well. She's listening. She's also one of the coordinators for GYCP. Please feel free to get in touch with her. Also, she's from US and she does a lot of community justice work with chemical impacts. So please get in touch with her. And yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joshua, for joining us and sharing your perspectives.
Thank you.
I loved it all so much. Next, we will throw it over to our next speaker, Safiya, Sawney, who is joining us from Grenada and is the national focal point of Grenada to the INC and is a plastics expert. So excited to have you join us. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Tori. And I really want to commend the previous speakers, Shamyra, for bringing to the platform the realities of living in communities that deal with the production of plastic, and of course Joshua for bringing the SIDS perspective as a representative of Trinidad and Tobago, and for setting the stage on the youth priorities going into the INC treaty. So in terms of a bit of a background on what my job is, as was mentioned, I am the INC focal point for Grenada. What does that mean? It means that I'm leading the negotiations for the government of Grenada within the INC process. And we do this for this particular treaty process as part of a block. So Grenada sits within two negotiations blocks. One is the Alliance of Small Island Developing States. And so that represents about 39 plus global small islands. And then the second is a group of Latin American and Caribbean states. And so utilizing these two groups, we're able to push key positions of convergence within negotiations. So some of the priorities that Joshua would have mentioned, there's lots of different process to get those captured within the negotiations. But once that is presented as part of options to the treaty, it's really our jobs as the negotiators to meet and find areas of convergence and to really present a treaty text that's not only ambitious, but is also actionable. I know we don't have a lot of time, so and I really want to be part of the discussion element of this panel. And so I'll just quickly go through some of the actions that we have taken from the government perspective in Grenada. We would be one of several countries within the Caribbean and one of several small island developing states to have passed legislation that speaks to banning single-use plastic items. We're very proud of this piece of legislation that was adopted in 2018. And the idea is that through our engagement with these international processes, we will continue to further develop this legislation. And so what we'd like to see, at least at the global level, is avoidable and unnecessary plastics be banned at the global level. So that's part of one of the key asks that we're making within the treaty. We have done quite a bit of stakeholder consultations with community groups as well as importers and suppliers. I have worked directly on the policy, but I've also made recommendations to the government on the kinds of plastic alternatives that we should consider bringing in to the country. So as was referenced before, this treaty is looking at targeting the full life cycle of the plastic. So that means at the beginning of the production of the plastics, looking at the chemicals and the polymers that go into the production of the plastic, looking at the transportation of the plastic, as well as the use of the plastic and the waste management of the plastic, including those plastics that end up in the environment. And we refer to that as plastic leakage. Particularly for the marine environment. It's very important to us as small island developing states with very large exclusive economic zones to ensure that we factor in good and sound plastic waste management into our ocean management practices. And I think we've all seen the literature on the impacts of microplastics. And part of the work that we're doing in setting the policy with the government is participating in the international treaty, but as well supporting national policy action with enforcement and with really, really ambitious measures. So in terms of what to expect, there's this sort of reference to the INC process. We saw this beautiful graph that was presented by Tori. This is a process that came out of UNEP Resolution 514, as was referenced before. And we are at the stage of hopefully delivering a treaty that could be adopted and enforced by the end of the year. But there's still quite a lot of work to be done at the international level to get to that space. But I think most of the parties that are participating in the process are very hopeful and we're very ambitious, and we're really looking to adhere to the timeline. And I must say that this timeline of getting a treaty out is very unprecedented. This is something that never happens. And so it's quite encouraging to see that despite our differences and despite our differing priorities, that we really understand the importance and the urgency of managing this issue at the international and the global level. So to add to some of the priorities, I think Joshua mentioned some of them. Of course, just transition is one of the things that we are in full support of, and that is captured within the current language that's in the treaty. For small island developing states, we want to ensure that the treaty references our special circumstances. We have very small economies and we have very small capacities, and we are on the front line of the triple planetary crisis, which is climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. So for us to implement this treaty, we would need quite a bit of support, and we would need the support of the international community in a way that makes sense for us. For Grenada, we would love to see the treaty include a list of those problematic chemicals and polymers as well as products. That's something that we are pushing for as Grenada, and we're hoping that through negotiations of our groups, we can have the support of the groups going in to INC4. But it's really important for us that we capture that ambition at this point of the treaty, and we don't delay the process for another 5 to 6 years. We're looking for a very strong compliance system. So that means being able to capture elements that ensure that we actually work towards ending global plastic pollution. And then I guess finally, before I end, I want to say that because we are often indebted and because we are often we don't really have the necessary resources, infrastructure, technical assistance. One of the things that's super important for us in this treaty is to have a finance mechanism that delivers. So it's not just asking for financing, is ensuring that we can access the financing, and the financing is actually used to support our national processes. So it's really important that we get this right. Too often that we've seen as small island developing states advocating for financing, advocating for resources, but really struggling to put our hands on it. And so we're learning from the lessons of past treaties and applying it to this particular process so that we have something that's not just ambitious, but is implementable. And I guess really finally, one thing, we do realize that the private sector has an important role to play here. And so we are strong advocates for including the private sector as part of the solution. We cannot move forward without ensuring that they play the role that they're meant to play. And so I will end here, and I'm looking forward to questions and discussion. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Safiya, for joining us and sharing your knowledge. I learned so much from you just now. I'm excited to pass it over to our next speaker, Carlos Ochoa, who is joining us as the conservation manager at Azul. And Carlos will be sharing some perspectives from the UNEP report that was put out in 2021. So I'm very excited to hear some recommendations and the findings from that report. Thank you, Carlos, for joining us.
Thank you, Tori. I appreciate the invitation, and especially grateful to Earth Echo for allowing us all to be a part of this. So I just want to start off again with Carlos. I'm the conservation manager at Azul, which means blue in Spanish, and we are a grassroots organization working with Latinos to conserve marine resources. I'm going to share here in the chat a quick link to the Who We Are section. That way folks are able to get a glimpse of who we are and what we do. But to go back into some of my remarks here, I first joined Azul in March of 2021, and that was a month before the public release of a report that we co-wrote with the United Nations Environment Program titled Neglected Environmental Justice Impacts of Marine Litter and Plastic Pollution. I'm going to be sharing the link in a bit, but the report highlighted how plastic pollution hurts the achievement of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. For those who are not aware, think of these like a list of goals that the countries of the world agreed to achieve for a sustainable future. And the report highlighted how the life cycle of plastics, from the source extraction of the oil to the waste of plastics, disproportionately affects marginalized communities around the world. And since the report's publication in early 2021, Azul is excited to see more action is being taken in the national and international levels to address plastic pollution's impacts on people and the environment, especially ocean justice communities. I'm going to now share the link to the UN website where people can access the report. It's both in English and Spanish. But then to get back here, I want to give a brief timeline of some of the awesome developments that have happened in ocean justice since the report was released in 2021. So on the national level, beginning in 2021, Azul co-led an initiative to convene environmental justice, community, indigenous, and national conservation nonprofit groups to create a consensus-based federal ocean policy platform that promotes ocean justice. And this was known as the Ocean Justice Forum. If you fast forward to September of 2022, the forum publicly released its Ocean Justice Policy Platform, which accomplished three goals: a definition of ocean justice, a set of principles that guided the development of the platform and that ideally guide the achievement of ocean justice, and then a federal policy platform. When I was with Azul in 2022 and 2021, I was able to take part in those convenings. So I'm proud to see that people came together in community to advance ocean justice. And then in December of 2023, the White House released its own ocean justice strategy to advance environmental justice for communities that rely on the ocean and its resources. So a lot of great progression. On the international level, we were enthusiastic as Azul to see the United Nations Environment Assembly, think of them like the Congress for the World on environment issues, adopting a March 2022 resolution to end plastic pollution through a legally binding treaty. Now, Azul acknowledges that the amount of time and work that went into UNEA's resolution adoption goes back further than our report, but we're still happy to see the conversation on environmental justice in the context of plastics in the marine environment still grow. And so it brings us now to this month of 2024, where we'll see countries go to Canada to hopefully deliver a global plastics treaty that advances ocean justice. So now to get into the meat and potatoes of, or really I should say the shrimp and lobsters of my remarks here, of our perspectives and recommendations. Azul's key perspective on the Global Plastics Treaty, as informed by our report, is that the life cycle of plastics poses obstacles to the full and timely achievement of all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. But I'll highlight a few that are worthwhile to go into. One is the Goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production. So plastics, from when you extract the oil, create the materials, to the production and the disposal of it, can be a really problematic industry. A lot of speakers have already pointed to the effects from for example, the petrochemical facilities that may take a part in the plastics production. And in a lot of cases, this industry is commodifying natural resources for profit. Think of, for example, bottled water. And they also hinder the development of public infrastructure, such as reliable, clean drinking water that should be provided by your local government. The next is SDG 13, which is climate action. Plastic production drives climate change through the emission of greenhouse gases related to oil extraction, transport, and the incineration of these plastics once they're in a landfill. Not only did our report highlight this, but we also wrote about how the impacts of these emissions throughout the stages of the life cycle of plastics hurts marginalized communities the most. And a third goal is SDG 14, which is life below water. Plastic pollution threatens marine wildlife in particular. So they'll suffocate on these plastics, they'll ingest them, they become entangled, and their ability to reproduce is often threatened. So with that being said, our recommendations informed by the report propose that future environmental agreements like the Global Plastics Treaty need to be adopted with legal provisions that uphold international human rights standards to better address environmental justice issues. Previous conventions on the control of waste failed to have sufficient enforceability. They didn't penalize countries for unintentional losses of plastic waste. And in a lot of cases, don't account for land-based sources of marine plastic waste. So we hope that the upcoming meeting in Canada will create a legally binding treaty that accounts for these gaps while centering human rights in the treaty language. So thank you all so much for having me. Azul is appreciative of the opportunity to be a part of this panel. And as a final call to action, I'm going to be sharing here a link to a petition that we have to encourage our own administration in the US to include strong language for the Global Plastics Treaty. So that is in the chat. So thank you all very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carlos, for joining us and sharing your perspectives and dropping those links in the chat. We will also follow up with everyone via email and share those links. Next, we will turn to our speaker, Rachel Bustamante, who is joining us as the Ocean Program Director at Earth Law Center, and will be providing a high-level overview of ocean justice and tangible takeaways ahead of INC4. And Rachel, I am pulling your slides up now. And
Thank you so much, Tori. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm the Ocean Program Director at Earth Law Center, a nonprofit organization working to advance laws and policies for nature. And we're also a member of the Plastic Pollution Coalition. First, I want to thank the partner organizations of the webinar and all of the amazing speakers so far for sharing your experiences and work. I think the same thread I'm seeing throughout each of these presentations is that plastics are undeniably a justice issue. And honestly, how I'm starting to phrase this issue now is that plastics are really an ocean justice crisis. We know disproportionately the ocean and marginalized communities are harmed by the life cycle of plastics, that metric tons of plastics are entering the ocean, devastating wildlife and contaminating seafood or polluting beaches, but that those most severely affected are often the least responsible, like small island developing states, indigenous peoples, and the global south. And though every person really is harmed by plastics, we know there's microplastics in our air, food, water, soil, even blood. There are disproportionate negative impacts that are happening across race, occupation, ethnicity, class, gender, and age. And I've really observed a notable gap exists in recognizing those interconnections. And that's why a focus of my research and advocacy is around plastic justice. And right now with the treaty, there's so much positive progress. And at the same time, the text as it stands does not mention human rights even once. So it right now does not include indigenous rights, and it does not include, the rights of plastic waste pickers, primarily of the global south, whose livelihoods depend upon plastic collection. And even the word justice is not in the treaty right now, much less just yet any principles of environmental or social justice. And I really appreciate the UNEP and Azul report that Carlos just presented, because it was really a key inspiration and likely my most cited source in the development of this youth-led report by Earth Law Center, Advancing Ocean Justice in the Global Plastics Treaty that we just released. And what we found is that ocean justice in this treaty means protecting the ocean and human rights and addressing injustice or progressing social equity. And it's not to say not only must human rights be meaningfully included throughout the text, with every provision, we can ask ourselves if it will tangibly help safeguard our fundamental human rights to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, or what changes do we need to make so that it does. Can we go to the next slide, please? And we looked at nearly 400 statements across 175 countries to the INC to map support for human rights inclusion by country. And as you can see, the regions of the global south that experienced the worst impacts, they demonstrated the strongest and most explicit support for including human rights in the treaty. Next slide. We also looked at principles that provide tangible examples of how the treaty can put justice first in every provision and what that would look like. And I'll briefly just run through these. So recognition justice. Are the injustices that are occurring to marginalized communities explicitly mentioned in the treaty, and are their views and needs meaningfully included? Procedural. Can then these affected communities participate in transparent decision-making? And distributive justice. Who will receive the most harm or benefit from a provision, and where do we put the weight of responsibility? Intergenerational justice. Will the treaty and its obligations help ensure future generations inherit a healthy ocean and a healthy planet? And finally, restorative. How can we both prevent harm from happening, but also provide reparations or repair to communities and ecosystems when harms are done? Next slide, please. And just overall, it cannot be overstated that plastics are a climate, a human health, an ocean health, and just justice issue. If the plastic industry were a country, it would be the world's 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter. And the bottom line is that plastics exacerbate inequities and unfairly harm those most vulnerable among us. So just based on the findings of our report, some of the key recommendations that just really build off of what all of my colleagues have said so far is that advancing ocean justice means we protect the ocean and human rights, and we put justice first. And to actually address many of those injustices today and those that could actually worsen, we have to cap and put a strict reduction on plastic production to stop accelerating global climate change. And that includes a just transition for affected and workers and communities. And we also need binding provisions. Right now, there's some divergence on whether articles should be voluntary or have time-bound, legally binding mandates, but we need those strong obligations to ensure that it's the highest protection for people and nature. And then as Safiya referenced, to protect human rights, we need strong bans and phase outs on any unnecessary or concerning chemicals and plastic products. There's an estimated 16,000 chemicals found in plastics, and over 1 in 4 are hazardous to human health. And finally, we need plastic literacy, ensuring that industries trying to keep us in the dark are transparent so that everyone knows the risks, while also increasing education so we all can make informed decisions. Both of these recommendations and a summary of our report are available in these briefs in both English and Spanish. And I'll put that in the chat and make it available later. But just in my view, how equitable this treaty turns out will have undeniable implications for people, of course, the ocean, and truly our planet. So I will be at INC4, and we'll put my contact in the chat for anyone with questions or wanting to connect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel, for joining and sharing ways that ocean justice can be centered. We appreciate it so much. Our final speaker is Dr. Sam Athey, who is joining us also from the Earth Echo International team as our Marine Plastics Program Manager, and is going to be sharing some ways that we can all take action to support centering ocean justice.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We're so excited to see so many people on the call, and we wanted to make sure that we had some action items for you moving forward to engage with the INC process and making sure that we build support and momentum for a global plastics treaty that includes consideration of ocean justice and human rights. And so we've teamed up with Earth Law Center and other partners to provide a series of actions for folks to take, whether you're in Ottawa on the ground or anywhere else. So these include, first of all, our Youth for Plastic Justice campaign, in which young people can contribute a video as well as sign our petition calling on member state representatives at INC4 to support the inclusion of justice and human rights in the Global Plastics Treaty. And so I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to the homepage for that campaign in the chat so you can learn more about it and find all of the petition links and everything there. And in addition to these actions, there's also the opportunity to join us at INC4 in Ottawa. On April 25th, we will be hosting an official side event as part of the Plastic Action Zone titled Youth Advocacy for Ocean Justice to End Plastic Pollution. And so this event will feature 5 guest speakers, all youth advocates working in this space. And so in addition to these opportunities, we'll also have another virtual event following INC4 for members of our Gen C community. So I'm going to hand it back to Tori to share a bit more information about Gen C and how to stay connected with us.
Yeah, so Gen Z is a global community of young ocean advocates ages 13 to 25. This is our digital platform powered by Earth Echo International. And as Sam just mentioned, we will be sharing more information for young ocean advocates to learn after INC4 and get to hear from young people who were on the ground and get to hear their takeaways. So we wanted to make sure that we talked about Gen Z here as an opportunity for any young people who are joining us today that maybe are not already in our community. I recognize a lot of our Gen Z members on the call, and just wanted to make sure that we provided the space for anyone who is interested or might know young people who could benefit from joining this community. We will continue to share all kinds of resources with the young people in this community regarding plastic literacy and continue building momentum towards INC4 and then afterwards towards INC5. So the way to join Gen Z is just to go to joingenz.org, and we will drop that link in the chat as well. And with that, I wanted to just pause for a second, and it is currently 5:52 p.m. where I am, so it looks like we have time for about 2-ish questions. We will see. I don't want to keep our speakers too long, but I want to go ahead and thank all of our speakers so much for sharing your perspectives and your insights. We have had dropped a lot of links in the chat, and we will be following up via email with all of this information so you can go back and reference it.